Welcome to everyone. I am Karen Gimnig, and I'm the Associate Director of the Cohousing Association of the U.S., which is sponsoring this event for us all. And Karen Hoskin is also with us. She's just quiet this evening with a cold she doesn't want to make us all listen to, but she's our Executive Director. And so just want to welcome you all on behalf of the Cohousing Association. And so the plan for this evening is just to do it. Laird will share with us some insights and wisdom, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask him questions. And if in the midst of that, if you're having tech problems and can put them in the chat, we'll try to answer them as they come up. So I think that's everything I need to say, other than to thank you, Laird, very much for being with us.
Sure.
And welcome. And I think we all know who you are, so I'm going to let that
stand. There you go. The bow wave of my notoriety has preceded me. All right. So tonight we're going to talk about working with emotions. This is a real pivotal piece for groups, of all cooperative groups. You really, the first point for me to make tonight is that you really don't have a choice about it, in the sense of you're going to have emotions in the room, whether you think you're trying to keep them out or not. So the question becomes, what would be the benefits of having no plan, which unfortunately is what most groups do, or having one? And I'm trying to make the case that you're much better off actually having an agreement or an understanding about how you're going to work with them, rather than just hoping for the best and hoping you'll survive what comes up when there's no agreement about what to do. I think there's a couple of main reasons why this is not comfortable territory for a lot of groups. I want to explain sort of the background. First of all, we live in a culture that doesn't emphasize emotional intelligence or even identifying what your feelings are. And so a lot of us have been raised, now there's exceptions obviously, but there's a lot of us who have been raised without really any comfort or familiarity with identifying what our feelings are, or being comfortable in the presence of others' feelings. And so when that's not comfortable or not familiar, we tend to shy away from it. So that's one of the reasons. The other thing is that often emotional expression is accompanied with aggression. That is, it can be, somebody can be upset, and it can be accompanied or packaged as an attack or a judgment, and that can be very damaging to relationship. It can be difficult to survive that moment, or in fact, things can get worse if you open the door to it. And most of us have had experiences of some kind or another in that way. And so why would you open yourself up to more of that? So those are the two main reasons why groups tend to be shy of working emotionally. But I want to talk about some of the advantages. There's two main ones that I see. First of all, we have the model in Western culture of trying to work in groups basically rationally. And rational, or thought, is just one way that human beings know things and work with things. To collapse everything into rational contributions is foolish, in the sense that it limits us to one language or one way of engagement. Now, I'm not anti-thought or anti-rational input. I'm just saying, why don't we become multilingual rather than only talk and work in a rational plane? For the most part, a lot of groups, although they don't maybe decide to do this on purpose, but the effect of it is they insist that everybody translate any other kind of input into some kind of rational piece, and then it's engaged on that level. So there's the distortion of the translation that goes on. In reality, as human beings, we work in many levels, thought being just one, feelings being another. We also work intuitively. Some of us work spiritually. Some of us work through body knowing or kinesthetically, just to expand the field of different ways that people engage. And the more that a group can open up to these different modes, then it has a chance to deal in the original tongue of what somebody knows about something. And sometimes they know something more surely or comprehensively or more insightfully in a non-rational way than in a rational way. And it's to our advantage to be able to take it in its original form. So the first thing to try to offer to you of why do this is that sometimes the emotional relationship to a topic is more potent or more insightful than the rational version of it. And so let's allow that to be in play. That's the first piece. The second piece is, for the most part, the model of meeting behavior in Western culture has a pretty flat affect. In other words, people are expected to be kind of calm, one person talking at a time, well-modulated voices. And while that's how people are some of the time, that's not how all people are. In fact, some people are rarely that way. And so meetings favor people with that style. That's not the only kind that's out there. And I think that there's a lot to be said for creating an opening where people's energy can bloom in the meeting, as long as it's not associated with an attack or with aggression. So I think passion on topic can be harnessed to help work on issues. The image I like to use in explaining this is, think about the energy in the room as the water in a fire hose. Suppose you're in a room and there's a fire hose in the room. And if no one's holding the hose and there's a power surge, the water is surging through the hose, there's no control over where the hose is aimed. You could get blasted in the face by the hose. That could be very unpleasant, even dangerous. Not only that, but the nozzle can be flopping around the room. It could hit you in the head. That could be dangerous. So you have a couple of responses you could have. One would be turn off the water, because then the hose won't be flopping around. And that's kind of the approach that most groups take. But instead of doing that, you could choose to hold the hose and then direct the water, because a fire hose with a stream of water directed at something can be used to solve problems. And then that, I think, is a better response. Learn how to manage the energy rather than let it flop around without any control. I think that's better than water. So my take is, let's bring energy connected to what we're doing into the room. Let's allow that and learn how to use it rather than cutting it off. So that's the basic premise of that. There's a good thing, there's positive things associated with feelings, not just the danger of somebody associating aggression with a statement of feelings. So let's suppose, all right, you're willing to give me a chance of, all right, I hear you trying to make the case for working with this. How would you actually do it? So I want to talk about the scariest emotions can come up in so many different forms. Probably the scariest version for most people will be somebody who's in active distress, somebody who's in reaction to something that's happened in the meeting, or it doesn't have to be in a meeting, it could be in another setting, but they're in reaction to something, and it is probably either anger or fear are the two that most people have the greatest trouble with. It's usually not unbridled joy is the problem. I mean, that's, people can handle that. This is an emotional response that's either kind of like they're paralyzed by fear, or they're incensed. Their ears are turning red, smoke coming out their ears. And often it's the second one that's associated with aggression. So it could often come across as judgment, an attack, that kind of thing. And that's a very scary moment. So I want to explain what's happening for the person who is in distress. I want you to look at that. I want you to think about it so that we can understand what's going on and what our choices might be. In general, when somebody goes into reaction, it's accompanied by a tendency to experience distortion. And what I mean by that is, the greater the distress, the greater the tendency to mishear what others are saying. You overplay something, you miss things or whatever. Actually, as if the distress is great enough, nothing gets through. a person just doesn't hear at all. It acts as a kind of, I call virtual earwax, where it's clogged up and the person in reaction isn't taking in information from those around them. And that means that person is not available to be worked with on problem solving or understanding other people's points of view and to work with. You've lost that person as a contributing member of the conversation when they're in high reaction. And so the question is, how expensive is that? Oftentimes, if you want a collaborative decision-making process, you're going to need to work with that person to the point where they're no longer in high reactivity so that their ears come unclogged. And what I've discovered is the best way to do that is by establishing a bridge to that person's reality, meaning they've got they let you know that something's going on for them, something's not working, and so you need to make a connection to what's going on for them, which will include, this was the trigger point, this is my emotional response. And when you get that right, what happens is there's a de-escalation. You can just guess, that's what I do as a professional facilitator. I try to reach out to somebody based on the strength of what they're saying. I play off of it. I try to make a connection. Wow, you're really pissed off about X. Do I have that right? If I have it wrong, they correct me. We stay with it until they feel like, okay, Laird's heard me. And when somebody feels heard, they don't feel isolated, they tend to de-escalate, they tend to, the distortion diminishes. And that is the essential initial element of working with somebody who's in distress, is actually hearing what's going on for them. This is not about agreeing with them. This is not about joining sides with them or supporting their position. It's about understanding what they're going through. That can be followed up, and often it's very important to understand the meaning of the reaction. Oftentimes, somebody's reaction doesn't make sense because you're not having a similar reaction. So you think, why are they responding so strongly? What is that about? Well, oftentimes there's information you don't know. It could be they're responding to an incident with what looks like an overreaction, but it turns out they had a sister who you're talking about pet policy, and you don't understand why all of a sudden somebody's worked up, and it turns out they had a sister that was mauled by a German Shepherd when he was a little girl, and she almost died. And so I'm making up a story here, but in other words, this has an emotional potency for this person, and you didn't know that. And so by allowing that to come out, you can put context on what's going on and understand why they're having a strong reaction. It doesn't mean you've got to do a certain thing. It just means you understand what they're going through. It's data. It's information to work with. Sometimes take the position that if somebody has a very strong reaction, it means, oh, we have to stop talking about something. We should no longer discuss this because it's triggered a reaction. That's not the position I'm taking. I'm suggesting, no, let's find out what the information is. Let's just take it as a thing that happens. Stop it anyway. Let's just take it straight on, find out what its meaning is, fold it into the conversation. We'll see where it goes. The fact that somebody's very upset doesn't mean we can't keep talking about it, but it should be based on making sure you understand what the upset means. Because then once you do that well, somebody tends to de-escalate and they're in a position to hear better, and back and forth can continue. I'm trying to make a deal here where if the group says, look, if you have a reaction, in this context, if you go along the lines I'm saying, you would say, we'll hang in there with you to understand what you're going through and what its meaning is. And then once we've established that, we expect you to extend the same kind of courtesy to everybody else. You need to be listening to what they have to say, and collaboratively we'll figure out what to do. The fact that you had a reaction doesn't mean we stop talking about it. It just means it's something we take into account. What weight we give it and where we go is yet to be determined, but it doesn't mean we stop talking about it. Okay? So now, it only takes me about 10, 15 minutes to lay out this stream of like why do it, how to do it. These are brave words. I mean, we're not in a situation where we're actually seeing it. And I'll have to say that in my experience, this is not an easy thing to do in the dynamic moment. When somebody is very upset and yelling, say, can you actually do what I'm saying? Can you reach out to them? It's kind of like standing in front of this runaway truck instead of diving to the side and trying to get out of the way. This is not a simple thing to do. I know that I can do it because I've been doing it professionally for 3 decades. I can teach it, but it takes a certain amount of courage to actually stand in there in a situation that you've learned is dangerous and is tricky. And you might be the object of that person's upset, and that can be a very uncomfortable and scary position. So the fact that I'm pitching its potency doesn't mean that learning how to do this and getting comfortable working in that moment is going to be a simple thing to do. However, I think there's a tremendous amount of potency, and the ability to bridge over things that are otherwise fractured and broken in communities is enormous if you can learn how to do this. So that the stakes are high. This is a real sharp contrast with a culture that does not tend to honor emotional input outside of a therapeutic setting. And then I'm not talking about therapy here at all. I'm just talking about paying attention to what's actually happening. Okay. So, let's talk a little bit more about what it would look like if you were trying to reach out to somebody who was in distress. It's not unusual that in the expression of the distress, they may be provocative in the way they're putting it out. And your first reaction might be, wow, that's outrageous what that person's saying. They're attacking somebody while talking about their upset. That's not unusual, and that's a particularly tricky moment. Your first instinct may be to object to their attack. However, if you think about it, I think it's potent to think about people who are in high distress as like somebody who's drowning. And what they're wanting, if you're drowning, what you want is oxygen. You need to breathe. And that trumps everything else. So somebody making a comment about their swimming strokes is not welcome information. In other words, say, oh, that was really a poor way you went about trying to get oxygen. You bump somebody on the head in the root. It's like they're not interested in that. They want oxygen. And so your job, if you're trying to bridge to that person, is to set aside their provocative qualities to make a point about, I hear what you're saying. You're upset about that. You're scared about this. If you get that correct, there'll be time down the road to talk about the fact that they were provocative in the way they expressed it. And the way that you can best secure a shift in energy so that the attack ends is by hearing somebody, because they don't stay in high distress if they've been heard. That's generally the way it works. And so I emphasize that the number one job when you're trying to connect with somebody who's in distress is to bridge to them. And that has to be it is not enough to say, I hear you, I get you. You have to be able to give them a quick synopsis of, you're really pissed about, or you're really afraid about this because this happened and it has this meaning for you. It has to be that kind of a concise statement. Another hint that makes a difference here is that in general, people who are in distress are skeptical that people actually hear them and understand what's going on for them. They feel isolated and often pretty unsure of how it'll go. They get to be nervous about their dynamic in the group. And so if you, it makes a lot of difference what your energy is or your affect in connecting with somebody. So it's more important that you get the affect right than that you get the words right. So let me give you an example. If somebody was really, they're screaming like, oh my God, I can't believe you parked the car in front of the fire hydrant again and it was towed away. And I mean, you idiot, that's the third time that's happened. And so they're really upset about the mindlessness or the carelessness of some group member having parked the car in front of the fire hydrant. And if the person trying to connect with them comes across with a centered, calm voice and says, wow, you're really upset that the car was parked in front of the fire hydrant and was hauled away again. It's really bothering you. that's going to land differently. And you go like, you're really pissed that the car was parked in front of the fire hydrant. This has happened before. It's driving you nuts. And the second one is going to be more in the energetic zone of the person's reality, and they'll be more likely to feel like you're getting it. You're actually hearing me. The first one is more like you're trying to manage me. You're trying to contain me. You're condescending to me, that kind of thing. So it's very important that when you're trying to reach out to somebody, you seem genuinely interested in them rather than trying to keep them from continue to stay in a high reactive state. It's ironic that by raising your energy level, you're likely to lower theirs. It's almost counterintuitive, but that's been what I've discovered. So you need to meet them where they are. I mean, similarly, suppose a person is crying and they're sobbing in a corner, and you want to connect with them. It won't work. You're like, whoa, stop the meeting. Somebody's crying. That's not going to work. I mean, they're going to feel overwhelmed and called out. They're not going to feel connected with at all. You have to change your electron level to match theirs. So you want to say, I want to stop the meeting now and check in with Dale. I see tears coming down your cheeks and I want to know what's going on. You need to meet them where they are. You have to have a range to do this, to feel like you are touched, seeing accurately what's going on for them. The one other piece I wanted to say in theory-wise is this can happen in any group context. There can be moments when somebody's upset, and this applies when you can use what I'm offering here in this web chat in any context. But I want to particularly focus on when it happens in a meeting and when you might make the choice to use is in the whole. It's your most expensive asset. Time when everybody's sitting together. And I think it needs to be possible, even though it was probably rare, to work emotionally in a whole meeting. Now, why would you do that? Under what conditions would that be justified? I can think of 4. First of all, if you agree with my premise that it's good for the group to actually have a plan for how to do this, then you're going to need to develop capacity. You need to practice this so that when you really need it, you know how to do it. I mean, you have confidence that somebody or some group of people in your group can deliver that in the dynamic moment. You can't just agree in the theory and then hope that when the moment comes, somebody can actually do it for the first time. So sometimes you need to do it even though that moment doesn't require it, so that you'll be ready when a stronger or more needed moment arises. So capacity building is one reason. Another is sometimes the issue is hostage to the distress, meaning the person who's in reaction is so crucial to the implementation of what's going to be the solution of an issue. They're so central to the issue that you've got to work through their distress in order for them to have buy-in with the solution. And so you can't go around it. If you effectively delay working with that, it means you can't work the issue. So you're either going to have to accept delay or do it on the spot. Another reason, a third reason, is sometimes suppose somebody's got an issue with me, and it turns out, so the two of us are in some tension. And if we choose to work it, not just for the benefit of the relationship I've got with the other person, but it might be half a dozen other people have the same issue with me. It just doesn't happen to be them right at the moment. And so they're very interested to see what gets resolved with Laird, because there, but for the grace of God, go them. You know, in other words, the next time it'll be them. And they want to see, how can we get unstuck with Laird? And so if multiple people have the same issue, sometimes you need to do it in the whole group so that everybody advances together on understanding about how to not be stuck or caught in the same trap. Or the fourth reason would be the group has got a pattern. So it's not at all unusual to find a group, for instance, that's conflict averse. And so they freak out in the presence of rage or high anger. And so it can be good to say, all right, we know we're weak in this. When we have an occasion where it surfaces, we better work it so that we can collectively as a group be more robust in our ability to not lose our shit when anger comes up. The goal of this in many ways is not to try to extinguish reactivity. I think that's hopeless. I think, though, you can change how the group responds to reactivity. If you can get to the place of saying, oh, that's a normal human behavior, it's going to happen some of the time, we need to have the capacity to recognize it and deal effectively and authentically with it when it comes up. So the goal here is to not be reactive to reactivity. That you can do. And that, I think, has got a huge benefit. If the group goes, oh, okay, so-and-so's in reaction, we'll deal with it. Rather than, uh-oh, they're in reaction, this is the dangerous part. So I'm trying to get a shift that way by giving you the tools to be hopeful that this can be not just something you'll survive, but something you'll actually benefit from. Okay. And I've given you 4 reasons of why you might choose to work some distress in plenary, even though many of the times you might say, all right, we've identified this issue, maybe it can be worked more outside of plenary in that less expensive space. There is a big difference between the group witnessing the resolution of something that seems stuck and hearing a report about it. There's a way in which everyone is brought together in a way that's unifying and community building when it's done well. And it's just a hollow thing. It's not near as potent when you just get a report that, oh, we had a conversation and everything's better now. If you don't witness this, it doesn't happen in quite the same way. People aren't as much a party of it and benefit from the shift in energy. Okay. All right. I'm going to pause there. I mean, that took about 30 minutes to go through some major principles of why work emotionally, some basic thinking about how to do that. I guess one last thing I want to say is, in general, it's better if you're going to work any kind of distress. In my experience, it's better to work in dyads, meaning have somebody who's in distress, they may be triggered by something somebody else did, have those 2 people be together, even though other people may have the same issue. You don't want to have dogpiling on somebody, where 4 people have the same issue with one person and 4 people versus 1 is not it doesn't tend to lead to good things. So I would say just have 1 person be representative, keep it with those 2 people. If you successfully work through the dynamics and repair relationship damage between 2 people, what happens is that other people are often carried along by it and are inspired by it and don't actually have to go through it themselves to benefit from the breakthrough. And it's much simpler to just have the 2 people work it in the moment. So that's the way I usually do it when I'm facilitating, is I take a moment to just work dyads. All right, I'm going to pause there and see what questions people have.
So Chase asked, would this be close to nonviolent communication?
It is. It's not. It's somewhat different. 2 differences that are important for me. I mean, I developed my thinking on this independent of the work of Marshall Rosenberg. He's much more famous than me, so he's got that going for him. One of the things is, there's a thing that Marshall talks about, and I've studied some of the thinking there. When at the front end, when you are making a connection to somebody, that first initial bridge, there's a question that's often asked in nonviolent communication of, do you want a reflection or a response? The choice be reflection, meaning, let me tell you what I heard. A response is, let me tell you what I think about what you said. And so in NVC, there's a choice about what goes on. I don't think there should be a choice. At the front end, you should always give a reflection. That is, you should always establish that you've heard what the other person said. Too much mischief comes from somebody jumping ahead with a response when the person isn't really solid about being heard. And if you don't establish being heard, you're going nowhere. You're going nowhere. You have to build the bridge first. So I think that's a false choice at the front end. Now, there's room for responses later on, but I would never start there. I would always start with a reflection. All right, so that's one difference. Another one is in nonviolent communication, more toward the end of the sequence, there's a chance to make a request of what you would like. And when I work dyads, I prefer to go through a step that looks like this. It's 4 steps. The first one is, what's the feelings? Second one is, what's the story? In other words, what happened? What are the events that the feelings are associated with. What is the meaning? What is the potency of this? Why does it matter? You answer that. And then the fourth step would be, what do you want to do about it? And NVC, they offer an option of what requests would you like from other people? What would you like the other person to do to come toward you? And I think it's more, when you're in this tender space of trying to repair damage to relationship, I think it works better to not make a request, but to offer an olive branch. What unilateral step could you make toward the other person that is not about changing your values? It's not about changing your position, changing your personality. What could you in good faith say, look, I've listened to you, you've listened to me. I'm willing to do this now that I know what you're looking for, as a unilateral offer, because I want our relationship to be better. And I think it works better to make an offering rather than to make a request, because I think it's very easy for requests to come across as demands, and then you can spiral back into tension again. So those are two places that I have a different take on it than NVC. But there's a fair amount of similarity. What's next?
What if they deny they are angry, in quotes? I'm not angry, I'm just da da da.
Well, that can happen. I would just rather than get into an argument, I think it's better to just get into descriptors. So you can say, well, you've raised your voice, your face is turning red, you're breathing fast. When I'm like that, it usually means I'm angry, but maybe not. And the person, you can tell they're angry, but they're in denial. They go like, no, I'm not angry. I'm just excited or something. And it's like, then basically what you're saying is like, okay, well, then, show me different behavior if you're not angry, or own it. And I mean, you don't have to pin them to the wall. You can just say the thing that led you to that conclusion, and then back out and give them some room to find their own way, either to shift where they are or to own what's going on. Twisting their arm or labeling somebody that's unwilling, that is not productive.
Okay. Do you do this in front of the group, or do you take the person aside?
I do it both ways. I tried to give examples. I walked toward the end of the talk. I gave you examples of when you would do it in the whole group and why. Mostly, though not. Mostly you do it on the side. I mean, you do it, any context that's going to work. However, sometimes it's potent to do it. And I think you need the capacity sometimes to do it in the whole group, even though that's not a common thing.
Great. How does one work with a person in distress who feels heard only if people agree to go along with their ask? That's from Mary.
Well, I mean, you're distinguishing. You're saying, this is what you're feeling. This is what the trigger was. This is its meaning. That's not agreeing with. It's just understanding what they're saying. And then you have to say, look, I'm not taking sides. I'm just hearing what's going on for you. I'm taking it as important. It's useful data. And we're going to continue with the conversation. The fact that you care strongly about it does not mean you're going to get your way. Because now that we've extended listening to you, I'm expecting that was your right to be heard. You have the responsibility to extend that same thing to other people and work constructively with what they're saying. We will come out where we come out. I don't know where that is. I'm only starting with the understanding that it's important to know what what you're going through. And we'll honor that, but I can't promise you that there'll be agreement with it.
Okay. Says, I am thrilled this will be recorded. I heard you at the Canadian Cohousing Conference and I'm pleased to rehear this. Do you know of other resources in this area we could use to learn more about this?
Well, there's, I think what Chase had brought up earlier, but NVC is certainly a whole body of work. It's got a lot of application. There's a lot of cachet with another modality called restorative circles. I like what I do a little better than that, but I mean, these are all good things. The most important point I'd like you to take away is you have something, put something in place that your group feels like it's got the capacity to deliver on. It's not so important that there's one true way. I have the way I advocate and teach people in that, but there are multiple choices about how to work with distress, and having nothing is the problem, is much worse problem than which thing you pick. And then you have to, if you're going to do that, you have to have people in your group who can do it. I mean, it can't just be, this is the theory we've agreed in. We can actually have practitioners. You don't have to have everybody do it, but you need enough people so that when the moment comes up, you reasonably have somebody present that can step in and work with the feelings. So that's the most important thing.
Okay, so someone's just asking for a repeat clarification of something you said.
Okay.
Make an offering rather than a...
Then a request. In NVC, there's room for, do you have a request? And I think that's not really, I don't think that's really the best way to approach it. What I do when I work with it is I ask people if they can make an offer, a unilateral offer that's meant to be respectful of the other person without selling out or changing their fundamental position. They're still who they are. They've been heard. They've heard what other people have said, and they think, okay, I can do this thing that I understand will be forward moving in our relationship as a unilateral act. And I think that tends to be a very good de-escalating step. In other words, if you can go through those, I gave 4 steps. What are the feelings? What's the story? What is the meaning of it? And then what am I willing to do about it? If you can go through all 4 of those things, you should definitely have very different and de-escalated energy at that point. It doesn't mean everything's all fine and they're going to start singing in the church choir together from now on, but they should be able to communicate clearly with each other without being in reaction. And that's what you're aiming for here.
Okay. Next question. So if you do it at the side, you stop the meeting? How?
Yep.
Everyone just sits and waits?
Yes, and so that's expensive. And so you don't do that as a matter of course. You do it only at need. I tried to walk you through the occasions when that might be appropriate. I mean, it's an expensive thing, so you only do it with care and when it's really justified. And there will be moments when it will be. In my experience, that can come up. I was working with a group just last weekend, and they, I gave them a choice of different things we would do I was facilitating a retreat for 3 days, and we came to the last day. And one of the choices for the last day was to work some longstanding tensions with a person who used to be in the role of executive director for a business that the group ran. And the group said, oh, we don't need to do that. We have the capacity to do that. We can take care of that. So then I reflected back to the group. I said, okay, I hear you say that. And yet this is the 3rd time I've been in this community in a year. And each of the times I was here, this issue persisted. And so you're not convinced when you say you got the capacity, okay, but you don't do the work. So it's like, when are you going to actually deal with this? And that was my job as the outside facilitator to point out, it's like, you're saying one thing, but you're not backing it up with action. And so sometimes groups are unsure of their footing and afraid to take on this stuff because they're not sure they'll do it well. I don't know what it all means, but sometimes groups have a self-image that is a little bit more advanced than the reality.
So the next question is, when the hose is out of control, one must accept a little battering to help get it under control.
Well, I guess you might, if you reach for the nozzle, I guess you could miss it and then get bonked in the head. I mean, certainly damage can occur. I mean, people are going to say things that could be hurtful. I mean, this is the danger. You open that door. I mean, the thing is, even if you prohibit it, it's still going to leak. You can't tell me that people don't ever say nasty things. That's not reality. Sometimes they do. Whether it's intentional or whatever, there's leakage. People say hurtful things. And so I'm trying to get it so that you're not afraid of that moment and know how to correct it. The hard part in that dynamic, I don't know how clearly I made this point when I was going through the first 30 minutes, but is not getting into a battle over the hurtfulness or the provocative nature of the comment. The best thing to do in terms of everybody's safety is grabbing the hose. It's recognizing, oh, you're upset, and this is what it's about. That is the safest thing you can do.
So we have, how do we build group capacity for these skills?
Okay, you're gonna need to study some. You're gonna have to have a commitment to study some modality, whether it's what I'm offering or whether it's restorative circles or NVC or something. Some modality of working emotionally. And there's choices. I mean, I gave you 3, and but there's others. And I think you're going to have to just figure out something that appeals to you or appeals to your group. And then you need some subgroup, at least, to, with the support of the whole group, to put effort into understanding that. And then once you feel solid enough in what you're doing, to get an agreement in the group that this is what you have permission for your facilitators to do when those moments come up, to how to recognize what's going on with the feelings and the undercurrents in the room. I think this is very potent stuff. I mean, I do a facilitation training program where this will be one of the key elements in it, is teaching people how to recognize those moments and step in and be effective. And I mean, the theory is one thing, but you actually have to practice it to get good at it. And I think that's important. It's an investment.
So next question is, many of these emotional issues in meetings can be predicted in advance. Sometimes they can be diffused ahead of time. Do you think this is advisable, or should it occur in the group following an outburst? Also, talk about defensive behavior and thin-skinned reaction.
Right. Well, I don't want you to be afraid of reaction. However, I'm not looking for a fight or high drama either. So, I mean, if you know that somebody's upset, I think it often is smart to go and check in with them ahead of time and try to find out. I'm not sure diffused is the right word, but if somebody feels going in that they've already been heard, they're less likely to be in high reaction. I mean, high reaction tends to be, I'm isolated, I'm in distress, I'm really worried about this, it matters to me, I'm not sure if anybody understands me. That's kind of the package. So if somebody's gone to ahead of time and checked in with them and taken the time to listen to them, they're much less likely to be as reactive. They may still have some, but it's going to tend to be less volatile, and that's probably a good thing. So I think doing your homework as a facilitator to check in where you think there might be reaction is probably a good thing. It's not to contain it, it's just to have an idea so that it's going to be easier to connect with somebody, and they're less likely to be provocative. So that's all going to make everything go better. But it doesn't mean that you underplay the strength of what it means to that person. You still want that strong statement of like, this really matters to me, but it's less likely to come out as an attack. It maybe come out as a cleaner statement, and that's to everybody's benefit. Now, let's see, the other part of that was around defensiveness.
Defensive behavior and thin-skinned reaction.
Okay, right. Well, those things can happen for sure. So in other words, somebody could do something and then somebody has a problem with what they did and they're critical. They say something critical and then the person gets defensive. So what I'm trying to do in that moment is I will often step in if it looks like, all right, this is going sideways or this is going south or whatever the metaphor is, where it doesn't look like communication's happening, people are in reaction with each other, then I usually try to step in and recast what's being said so that it captures the essence of the point, but has been defanged. I've taken out the poison or the provocation in it to emphasize, this is my reaction, this is what the meaning is, and then make it clear that each person is going to have a turn to say what, but don't get into a battle or an armored position. That can easily happen, and then I step in right away to try to recast it and keep people open to the conversation. As long as they feel like I'm treating them fairly and accurately hearing what's going on, they tend to stay more open. So that's the way I usually approach that. Now, that doesn't guarantee that somebody isn't going to shut down or walk out of the room. I'm just saying this is what I've had the most success with.
So the next question is, what if a person has been harmed? They may not wish to make any offer.
Right. I found, though, that if they've been heard well and acknowledged by the other person, so you've got two people and I'm working a dyad, person A and person B. If person B is able to tell A, okay, to A's satisfaction, this is what you're feeling, this was the trigger point, this is the meaning for you, and A says, yeah, you heard that accurately, then there's a softening that occurs. They're not so rigid, they're not so armored anymore. And so I've certainly had the occasion where a person, when I ask them, is there anything you're willing to offer the other person? They have trouble thinking of something. However, as a facilitator, I've never had trouble thinking of something. And that is something that they're willing to do, something that they feel like, okay, that's within my range. I'm not selling out. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It might be, I'm going to go for a walk on Thursday before dinner with you. And, you know, I like say, I'm skeptical whether you're doing enough for the community. I think you're a slacker. And then the person says, no, you just don't understand what I'm contributing. So they agree. I'll tell you what, every Thursday for an hour before dinner, I'll get together with you and we'll go for a walk, and I'll listen to what you've been doing in the last week to contribute to the community. So I'm not making up stories. I actually get information about what's going on, and I'll feel better about it. And then see, that's meeting a need, but also it's honoring the other person. And I'm making up this example, but because I'm looking for it, it's not that hard to find something that's constructive. And that's usually helps turn the corner. So instead of a degraded relationship, they put in place something that's constructive.
Okay, next question. Do you typically work with the whole group in your facilitation training, or just a subgroup of facilitators?
Well, in the training, we've got a group of students. It's usually 12 to 15. And then we have class time, and we're focusing on questions. But the model is that the students facilitate real meetings for the host community for that training weekend. The host moves around, so it's a different host each weekend. The training's a 2-year program. There's 8 weekends. It's usually at a different group each time. And the model is the students have to prepare for, deliver, and debrief real meetings for the host group. So we are working with the host, but the idea is if I throw the students in the deep end of the pool, they learn to swim faster than watching a video of Laird swim. So that's the model we use. They face real bullets, and then I'm in the room along with the other trainer to be there in case they get overwhelmed. We'll pull them out so nobody drowns, and the group still gets a decent meeting. But we find that the students learn faster that way.
How to keep more than facilitator from intervening?
Oh, well, you have to have an agreement about, I think generally you only want one person, one monkey in the barrel at a time. So, and I would say the first choice would be the facilitator. If the facilitator feels in over their head or it's not their skill, then you want to call on somebody else who's been identified as somebody who can do that. So the group should know who their skilled people are to handle that. And if the facilitator is not able to answer the bell or is ineffective, then somebody steps in. But I would say ordinarily the facilitator would get the first crack at it. It depends on the culture of the group, but that's the way I would do it.
What do you do with the situation when people storm out of a meeting?
Well, if there's only one facilitator, which sometimes there is, sometimes not, in general, I would continue the meeting and then go and see the person later. If there's 2 people, it's often effective to have if there's a team, have one of them go and check on the person while the other one works with the rest of the group. It could look like a lot of things. I've seen a person stepping out can represent a lot of things. Overwhelmed, they need a break. They could be furious. They could lose confidence in the facilitator. I don't want to generalize that it always means the same thing, but I would try to go and sometimes to take a break and then have the facilitator go check on the person. That's an option too. You have to use your judgment about what's the cost of everybody waiting while I'm working with the person versus continuing the meeting with that person missing. It's a judgment call. But I would, even if I was alone and decided to continue the meeting, my first order of business afterward would be to try to seek that person out and see how they're doing.
How does one deal with couples who seem to protect one another when usually the problem is with one of them?
Well, if I'm working a dyad, I would not treat them as a couple. I'd treat them as individuals. So one of them would be in the dynamic and the other one wouldn't. So I would keep the one that's not in the dyad. They don't get to talk. Only one of them does. And then whoever they're triggered by. So you just have to separate them. rather than having tag team somebody else. I just wouldn't allow it to happen. I mean, I would keep it, when I'm working a dyad, the only people talking are me and those two people. Everybody else is just watching. And then they can talk about it afterwards. But during that time when I'm working the dynamic, it's just those three people talking.
Okay. What about issues which are philosophical in nature that raise a lot of emotion? For instance, where to spend our money?
Well, that certainly can be a triggering point for a lot of people. I think you want to distinguish between the interpersonal dynamic and the group issues. Sometimes the tension has a group issue component, and sometimes it doesn't. When it does, it's better to deal with the interpersonal dynamic first. In other words, a person is upset and it is about X. And so we understand that and get that cleared up. And then we can go into the issue of, okay, now let's return to the topic of how to spend our money. But let's not pretend that it was a simple thing, or that that everybody was in a calm place about it. People weren't. So let's recognize the fact that there's reaction. Let's find out what the reaction means. This is not about what the solution will be. This is just about understanding accurately what's the context we're discussing it in. And you get that cleared up before you work on the issue of, okay, what do we do with the money? So, I mean, that happened this last weekend with a group I was doing a retreat. They had a cash flow problem, and people were pretty uncomfortable talking about money. So the conversation was continually impacted by people's discomfort about money. And we had to spend a lot of time clearing the air about that before we could talk about what to do about the money. So it was a two-part thing. And that's not rare.
Okay, we have one last question and we're about at the end of our hour. So,
okay,
since emotions are ever present, not just when there is an outburst,
right.
what have you found works well to help people identify and reveal emotions in meetings in an ongoing manner?
Well, it makes a big difference if you can turn the corner as a group to where, so people are encouraged to actually witness what's going on for them. Saying things like, wow, I notice I'm having a reaction. My heart is racing. I'm nervous about where this is going to go. You know, it reminds me of stuff when I was growing up when my mom and dad argued, and here we are again. And I mean, just saying those kinds of things helps contextualize what somebody's response is. And nobody has to do anything about that. They just take it in to understand what their experience is. And that creates a lot of sympathy in my experience. If people use their feelings to try to control the conversation, that, in other words, don't talk about this because it triggers me, that's going to be a problem. If people reveal their emotional response so that you can better understand what they're going through, that's actually endearing, and people like that. And because, you know, part of what we do when we're in meetings is to solve issues, but it's not just that. We're also in meetings so that we can enhance our relationships and get to know each other better. And sharing our emotional experiences is a huge part of getting to know each other better. For those people who are in the meetings just to solve problems and want to keep it, okay, let's just keep it down to our thoughts and steer clear of the chaos of emotions. They want to keep things really in a certain narrow range. And then for those people who are there who like, well, it's great to solve problems, just get to know my neighbors better. So you get to this moment where inward, explaining their emotional landscape. The first group of people go like, oh, we were doing so good until you started doing this navel gazing. And then the other people go like, oh, we're getting to the good part. You know, so there you've got this really different energy about what to do with that moment, because people are looking at what they want from the meeting through different lenses. And that's not often actually acknowledged. And so there's this dynamic tension in the group, and that's hard to navigate, because when you move in one direction, you're moving away from the other. So it's a case of like, let's build a robust picture of what are we trying to accomplish here, and how do we balance those two legitimate needs at any given moment.
Okay, so we have one more question come in. I'll see if you can make a short
Okay.
answer to this one. Can you explain more about the money issue? Do you take people aside or talk about the concept of money with everyone?
Well, no, not with everyone. I mean, I think there's a legitimate case that can be made, and this might actually be an interesting web chat for down the road. Is the fact that for many of us, we come into the community experiment with unresolved issues around how we relate to money. Now, I don't mean everybody, but it's common. And so a lot of people come into intentional community living hoping, oh, we can leave all that behind. Well, that's not really true. Money follows us where we go. I mean, nobody's entirely self-sufficient. And so being able to talk authentically about, well, what is my relationship to money? To what extent do I feel it's dirty? Do I need to, what is right relationship to it? What does sustainable economics mean? Those kind of questions. I think it's very worthwhile for most groups to actually set aside time, even a retreat, to just let's talk about attitudes about money. I mean, what we've got in our membership so that we understand each other and what we're trying to work with. There's a lot of personal work that can be done about relationship to money that could make an enormous difference to financial planning in communities.
Thank you.
You're
All
welcome.
Right. So we are right at the end. I want to take time to just say thank you, Laird, for that fabulous information. There's even more was being said in the chat. I think you stimulated a lot of good thinking for everyone.
Good.
And appreciation of everyone who was here. By my count, we were close to about 80 all told. So that's a pretty good audience. And that's about what we've been with the web chat. So thanks everybody for coming and coming again. Many of you are faces I'm seeing over and over again. Want to let you know that Cohousing US, the association, puts these on at no cost to you, but there is actually a cost to the association and staff time and so on. And if you'd like to make a donation in support of that, you can do that at the website at cohousing.org, and that's very much appreciated. The last thing I want to let you know is that the next web chat is next week. It is Thursday evening at this same hour, and it will be Jana Ludwig giving us an introduction to consensus. So thank you so much. Someone's also pointing out that Laird has an excellent blog, and I will concur with that opinion.
Okay. Well, thanks, Karen. I had fun. Hope to do it again.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'll be in touch about scheduling the next one.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. You're wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Great. Bye-bye.
Bye, Laird. Thanks, everybody.